Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Exploring the Omnichannel Impact, a panel discussion about changes in ATM and self-service management, presented by Inetco Systems Limited and hosted by ATM Marketplace. I'm Suzanne Clucky, editor of ATM Marketplace. Today we'll be talking about the growing influence of omnichannel banking and what this means in terms of ATM operations and management. Our speakers today, there they are Bob Meara, Ricky Goodwin, and Scott Dukvich. Bob is a senior analyst with the Celent banking practice. His research focuses on the branch and ATM delivery channels, customer analytics, and cash and payment processing technologies. Ricky is ATM services manager at Regions Bank. Previously, he was a business analyst for Regions, formulating and evaluating specifications for department reporting, software applications, and various ATM operations projects. Scott is the Director of Namer Software Sales at NCR. He came to NCR from the Gasper Corporation, where he spent many years supporting Gasper Solutions as a Global Medallion Services Manager. So to briefly introduce today's agenda, Bob will get us started today with a closer look at what omnichannel really is and what it does. From there, we'll move on to a panel discussion focused around 4 key questions. What does the omnichannel model mean for the ATM channel and operators? How will it affect the way ATMs are managed? What operational risks are associated with delivering an omnichannel customer experience, and how do you avoid them? And finally, how do ATM management solutions need to change in order to accommodate a self-service experience? Once we've wrapped up the discussion, we'll move on to audience Q&A and answer any particular questions that you might have out in the audience about the impact of omnichannel banking on the ATM and self-service management. I want to invite you to submit your questions during the webinar at any time by typing them into the chat window at the bottom left-hand of your screen. And one final item before I turn it over to Bob, today's webinar and the accompanying deck will be available for replay within a day or two. We'll send you an email and a link when it posts on ATM Marketplace. So that does it for me. Bob, take it away.
Sure thing. Thank you, Suzanne. So how do we deliver an amazing omnichannel customer experience? That's a question we observe more and more institutions asking. More important, beyond just asking it, a growing number of banks and credit unions have this as a specific near-term objective. But then there's the O word, omnichannel. A notable PR firm emailed me just a few days ago and said, "Hey Bob, can we have your frank input on this? We're sensing that omnichannel as a word kind of needs to go. Maybe it's overlived its usefulness. Should we keep on using it?" I thought, well, that's an interesting question for a PR firm. But my response is, well, there is some baggage with the O word, just as with other trendy, overused, and ill-defined buzzwords like, for example, digital bank or big data. But omnichannel is here to stay because it's how customers are increasingly wanting and demanding interaction with their banks and other service providers as well. So we don't have to like it, but we do have to adapt to it. But defining it is still kind of iffy. We asked this question in a survey, and the survey was focused on delivery channel technologies just about 1 year ago in October 2014. And we asked to see if to understand respondents' agreement with these questions that you see on the screen. And the idea was to see if there was strong consensus on what the term omnichannel even meant. And it's pretty clear that most, in this case, some 160 banks and credit unions all in North America, most feel fairly strongly that omnichannel is about ensuring that customers have a consistent experience of their brand, regardless of the channel used. And that's frankly pretty easy to agree with. And many thought as well that omnichannel, at least in the legacy environment, is one that requires a fair amount of channel integration so that customers' interaction can be seamless across channels, because we know customers have a kind of fluid, increasingly fluid use of channels. But there was some interest that omnichannel meant delivering the same capabilities and functionality across all channels, and I'm not so sure about that. If we look at the respondents' answers to the previous question by asset tier, it's clear that the smallest banks felt more, or a significantly greater percentage of small banks thought omnichannel was about doing the same thing the same way across each channel. But much fewer larger banks felt that way. In fact, even as it relates to mobile and online, serving different customer needs and needing to tailor their experience accordingly, well, twice as many large banks felt that way as small banks. And honestly, I have to weigh in and agree with the large banks here. And frankly, they're the ones who have comparatively invested a great deal of internal resources and study in the matter. And I think they were early adopters both for online banking and mobile banking, and so perhaps their experience here bears out a very different perspective. But simply beyond, it's one thing to agree on a definition. It's another thing to kind of operationalize that, to look at, well, what does that really mean? How do I do that? How does that impact various constituencies with my organization? So in having many, many conversations with banks, large and small, about this topic, I'll offer a Celent perspective, call it a framework. It doesn't attempt to answer all the questions, but it does attempt to get a bit more practical with what omnichannel means, and I'm going to do that over the next few slides. So we would offer that a framework for digital in banking is absolutely synonymous with a framework for omnichannel. The two are not different concepts. They are absolutely identical, and they have identical implications for banks and credit unions. And so we think digital in banking and omnichannel in banking is very much about delivering a customized for individual customers and customized for the channel or engagement mechanism, and consistent brand experience to customers across all channels and points of interaction. Well, why do we say channels and points of interaction? Well, because channels, what is a channel after all, right? Is a wearable device. Is that a separate channel, or is that a simple variation of digital? Well, does it matter? Is social media a separate channel? I don't know, but it is a customer engagement mechanism. It's a point of interaction. And we think doing this, delivering that customized but consistent experience, has to be underpinned by robust use of analytics and skillful use of automation. I'll explain what I mean by that, because analytics is another buzzword. I'll explain that and kind of justify very quickly that with no exception, we assert that doing the above here very much requires a change in the way products and services are both developed and brought to market, as well as a change in how IT is run and organized, and indeed changes in both organization and people and culture within the financial institution. So this is not simply a technology project. This really is a fairly sweeping change in how financial institutions operate. And why do all this? Not simply to keep up with the Joneses, not simply to address customer churn or preference. It's all about, we think, this is a long-term value proposition of delivering demonstrable and sustainable economic value. Okay, so briefly, a bit more on each of these. This customized and consistent brand experience involves, we think, three things. First is optimizing each channel individually, right? You all know how to do that. Every institution who's operated in the multi-channel environment historically knows about optimizing individual channels. But it's also about doing the requisite channel integration so that the proverbial omni-channel promise of being able to move fluidly from one channel to the next, to have a similar experience, to not lose work, for one channel to recognize historic channel interactions on other channels, etc. Those need to be delivered. As well, increasingly, institutions need to recognize that customers engage with banking services in a much broader ecosystem, and that's never been so apparent as in the last couple of years, not only with fintech startups, but with really fairly compelling things like merchant-funded credit card reward programs, right? Very much an example of a larger ecosystem within which the bank or credit union plays a very important role. But institutions, financial institutions, are no longer, if you will, an island. They have to operate in this greater ecosystem. And we see examples of that through API integration increasingly. For those of you who are at FinTech, last month APIs were front and center in a significant majority of the demonstrations. So analytics is another buzzword. It seems like any application that has any manner of reporting, if it can display a graph, it's said to involve analytics, and we think about it just a bit differently. But for brevity, let me just say this, that by analytics we mean using a variety of data from different sources, first and foremost internal sources, particularly transactional data within a bank, but not limited to that, in order to optimize in real time, not doing the analytics in real time necessarily, but having the effect of the analytics translated into both internal and external systems in real time for each customer. The external things are things that your customers see, interact with, and appreciate. Things like bank offers or alerts and notification, or third-party offers, or PFM or advice. Internal stuff, I mean product design, improving service levels, and changing risk management approaches, cross-selling, pricing, those sorts of things that might be externally obvious, but are very much changing the way the bank operates. And by automation we mean the most broad sense of the term, from rather mundane but very important things like automating workflow to achieve as highest straight-through processing rates as possible. I mean paperless account origination system, electronic statements, something as boring as that, to much more sophisticated and nascent things like using Siri or Watson technologies, or using algorithms to automate investment and other advice, right? Robo-advisors as they're called. So that whole spectrum from the mundane to the sophisticated. And then quickly we see digital requiring a change in how products and services are created and delivered, namely in the majority of cases, in order to be effectively provisioned using digital channels, products and services and workflow associated with their provisioning needs to be simpler, with fewer exceptions, with fewer overrides, right? And that requires carefully thinking through one's product suite. We see IT operating more in kind of a two-speed IT arena, where legacy systems are operated using one framework, and the digital and API-enabled environment is operated very differently because it has to be faster and more responsive. And then there are just a number of examples of how cultural changes and organization and skill changes are being brought to bear. Maybe the most obvious are hiring very different and newly skilled branch employees that are hired for their outgoing ability to engage customers, and less about their ability to balance a till at the end of the day. And the three levers of demonstrable sustainable value I spoke about, clearly every bank we've spoken to is demanding that it translate these efforts to a clear uplift in revenue, almost always a commensurate or a concurrent reduction in risk cost, and then thirdly, operational cost reductions are needed, and those are no more obvious than in the branch channel, which comprises somewhere around 40 to 50% of bank operating costs. And as transactions are quickly migrating from the branch to digital channels, branch right sizing is in the crosshairs for a growing number of institutions. So hopefully that sets the stage adequately.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Great explanation. I was particularly taken by your comment that omnichannel is not necessarily the same or identical across all channels, because I think that misperception is pretty widespread across at least the people that I've talked to in the market. Before we go on, we've got a poll question that we'd like to ask, and that is, what is your main reason for adopting omnichannel? We'd like to get all of you to submit your answers to this. We have several options for you: seamless customer experience, channel integration, streamlined operational backend, same functionality across channels, tailor experience by channel, and we're just not there yet. So we'll wait a little bit for everyone to have the opportunity to submit their answer, and then we'll have a look at the results when the poll closes. While we wait for responses, I'd like to remind you that you can submit your questions during the webinar by typing them into the chat window on your screen. We'll do our best to get to all your questions during the Q&A session, but if we should miss yours, our presenters will be happy to respond by email, and we'll have an address for you on the Q&A slide of today's presentation. So that'll be coming up shortly. And for the benefit of anyone who joined us late, I want to let you know that today's presentation, including the slide deck, will be available for replay at atmmarketplace.com. When it posts, we'll send you an email notification and link, which we welcome you to share with others who could not make today's event. And let's see where we're doing on our poll. Looks like the answers have started to slow down, and so I'm going to close the poll, and we'll take a look at the results. So it looks like seamless customer experience is really, and not surprisingly, the main reason for adopting Omnichannel. Bob, this comports pretty much with what you've seen too, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. I think a growing number of banks are really jumping on the customer experience bandwagon, or said another way, kind of embracing the increasing importance of providing a compelling experience across channels.
Right, right. Okay. Well, we're going to move on now to the panel discussion. And we'll have Bob, Ricky Regents, and Scott Zukovich from NCR. And we're going to go through our list of 4 questions. And if that prompts you in the audience to think of something that you'd like to ask, please go ahead and submit it in the chat box on your screen. The first question we're going to ask is, what does embracing omnichannel mean for the ATM channel and operators? Ricky, why don't you start us off on this one?
Yes, thank you, Suzanne. While omnichannel may be defined at the financial institutional level differently across the organization, I think we all can agree that embracing the omnichannel involves leveraging all customer-facing applications to provide a consistent customer engagement as well as transactional experience for the customer, as well as optimizing the ability for the financial institution to provide a secure transaction to the customer, as well as being able to consistently maybe start a transaction at one application and complete it, and that is maximizing the ability to provide an availability of the transaction application for the customer.
I think too, another thing that comes to mind, Suzanne, is that as more and more institutions think about the future of their branch channel, they're embracing the idea of in-branch self-service and assisted self-service. So that means ATMs are moving from through the wall or vestibule installations into the lobby. And so there's a number of implications of that, perhaps. But one thought is, tellers don't jam, but ATMs occasionally do, right? So as we move more transactions to ATMs, and that's a very explicit strategy of a significant number of banks we speak with. As that happens, then it's going to increase the importance of ensuring their uptime, right? So channel platforms are obviously going to need to talk to each other, like Ricky was saying, but I think also campaign and lead management solutions can't be solid anymore and still make a good customer impression.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. That definitely makes sense. Scott, what are your comments here?
Well, I think embracing the omnichannel approach means the deployer must recognize 4 key components. One is optimal capacity, 2, optimal capability, 3, best-in-class TCO, and then 4th and finally channel alignment. From an optimal capacity perspective, this involves a dynamic representation supporting the distribution strategy, right size for the deployment base. Optimal capability, meaning what I mean here is the functionality rich but focused on the distribution market, putting it in the right place at the right point in time. And then when we look at our financial statements, having the best-in-class TCO, growing the channel revenue stream through enhanced shareholder value, and finally on channel alignment, look and feel at the transaction between multiple channels, allowing for the choice for the consumer to fulfill their transaction.
Would that be across channels then, the fulfillment from one to another?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay. Well, from there, we will move to our second question, and that is, how will the embrace of Omnichannel, affect the way ATMs are managed moving forward? And Bob, let's kick off with you with this question.
Okay, so I'm the ATM management lightweight in the group, so I'll start with probably the real easy observations and let the experts follow. But so the first thing that comes to mind is, as we talk to banks, despite the growing bevy of non-cash alternatives, right? Cash is still robust and on the rise. So for most FIs, ATM transactions are on the rise, right? In no small measure is due to deposit automation, and so since they're comprising this growing share of customer transactions, right? And particularly as they enter the lobby, maximizing uptime is going to be even more important than it's been before. And it'll need to include which might be new functionality for some banks is going to need to include cash levels in each device, particularly once inside the branch, because ATMs won't be the only devices in there handling cash too. So to optimize cash handling, branch personnel are going to need to know what's going on, and I think that will represent another change. So ATM management won't necessarily be a back office task with alerts going to call centers. It's going to alerts are going to have to have multiple customers, one of which will be frontline branch staff.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's go next to Ricky on this question. And you have personal experience with this, so tell us what you found.
Well, I think Bob brought up a very important point around maximizing uptime and obviously around the responsibility of the ATM and the service and the support of the ATM resting within that branch organization. So obviously it would be a change. It would impact the way currently that is basically siloed within a help desk in the current environment and move it more so into the branches Bob mentioned, as well as the support in the KPIs around how the ATMs are managed and the maintenance around not just the ATM but all the available application channels for the customers to perform transactions to ensure that we maximize the availability of these applications, understanding that serving a diverse group of customers across the footprint, the importance that these applications are available for use will be more increased as we roll out into each and every market across the U.S. So.
Okay. Is that something that you kind of had to feel your way through, or were you able to plan for that in advance?
I think anytime you're taking a new approach to something, there's some planning involved, but obviously there's going to be a little bit of kind of feel your way through and make adjustments as you go. So we're right now at the earliest stages and kind of just testing on a number of different models and looking at really something that could serve all of our different customer groups that we currently serve in the region footprint. So.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I heard someone recently say that Omnichannel is an ongoing experience. You're never actually finished. You just set it and forget it, and that seems to be true. Scott, what's your take on this?
So from my perspective and where I come from the management side, the solutions need to be a step of this ever-changing landscape. There needs to be better projection models for cash usage and deposits, predictive servicing models set up, for the device to be available to the right person when they most need it. And this is reversing the supply-demand dilemma. From an operations angle, these environments are changing from more of a call center to more of a help desk to help out, as Bob mentioned, the frontline folks. They need to have all the right data at their fingertips to make decisions to immediate resolution, and either remotely resolve using tools and applications to let the management solution contact the correct responsible party for full resolution. They also need to understand the holistic view of the ATM, how it's connected, cash and deposit levels, hardware and software inventory, state of health. The goal here is to make them as efficient and effective as possible, even a reward scenario for higher availability. And lastly, I mention is that from a management solution, the data is only as good as it's fed to these things, to the solutions. This means enriched status health data to not only know where the fault is, but what the proper service that is required to resolve it, and when the component is actually healthy. With big data analytics tools in the market and many vendors compiling usage and fault statistics, predictive models will also benefit the F5, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is empower for a better consumer experience.
Right, so that's the upshot of all of this, is that that consumer experience and the development of consumer loyalty, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Let's move on to question 3 now then. Before we get to that, sorry, we have another poll question that we'd like to ask you and get you involved on. This question is, when you think of omnichannel, what is the first priority that comes to mind? Is it transaction management? Is it self-service device management, customer experience analytics, cash management, network and application management, none of the above, or you just aren't really sure? So we'll give you a little time to think through your answer on that and register it, and then we'll have a look at the poll results. In the meantime, once again, I want to invite everyone to submit their questions during the process of this question and answer. We'll have an audience Q&A at the end, and we'd love to hear from you and address things that you're interested in knowing about. So we'll do our best to get to everyone's questions during the Q&A, but if we miss yours, don't worry. We can always respond by email. We'll have the address for you on the last slide of today's presentation, and your question will get directed to the proper person from our panel discussion for an answer. And also for the benefit of anyone who joined us late, I want to let you know that today's presentation, including the slides, will be available for replay at atmmarketplace.com. We'll have that up in a day or so, and when it posts, we'll send you an email notification and a link that you can use to review the webinar. And you are also welcome to share this link with anyone else that you know who would benefit from this event but wasn't able to attend today. And let's see. It appears that we have all our responses in, so I'm going to close the poll, and we'll have a look at the results. Okay, when you think of omnichannel, what is the first priority that comes to mind? Customer experience analytics, that's really interesting. Determining what your audience is and how they are behaving. But we also have a pretty close, looks like a tie between transaction management and self-service device management. So obviously the management aspect of it is close to as important, if not equally important, when you take both of them together. Anybody want to offer any additional insights on this?
It looks kind of multifaceted to me, which is what I think most of us would have expected.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to our next question, which, here we go. Question 3. What operational risks are associated with an omnichannel customer experience, and how do you avoid these risks? That's a great question, and we are going to ask Ricky to start us off this time.
So while omnichannel may be presented as this anywhere, anytime, anyhow, fast and efficient approach to customer engagement and transaction interaction, really the most important, and I would say the biggest risk from a financial institution standpoint would be the failure or the unreliableness the unknown in regards to whether or not those applications are consistently providing what the customer expects. So, and I think Bob alluded to this earlier in regards to ATMs jamming while the teller may not jam. So to be able to provide a solution that's going to be consistent, and not only that solution, but also have in place the checks and balances and the support on the back end that will send the proper signals and alerts to any type of misinteraction, and be able to proactively provide an alternative solution that minimizes the failed event at the customer level.
Okay. That sounds like a really big task. Have you found that to be a particular challenge?
Oh yes, this is probably, and it's not something, obviously we have to be reasonable in our expectations. Obviously, as you alluded to earlier, Omnichannel is not set on a specific timeline, right? So this is something that we've plotted out, and we know that it's going to be an ever-changing, ever-evolving type of support model that we continue to be able to pivot based on feedback from the customer, as well as new technology that is introduced into the market. We want to be able to position ourselves so that we're able to quickly pivot and adjust to whatever software or application changes that may be down the road, and be able to still provide a consistent omnichannel solution to our customers.
Okay. That is quite a task. So let's get your input on this, Scott. What's your experience?
I'm going to narrow it down to one thing, and that's the fear of the unknown, what I like to call the unevent. Branch transformation has changed the banking model from a typical brick and mortar to a self-service model. Obviously, this means nobody is around these devices at particular points in time to report a faulty device. The management solutions need to understand the transactional volumes to help determine the lack of transactions or the unevent. As technology speeds forward with new transaction types, new security features, each has pieces and components that could fail at any point and create a negative consumer experience, which we may not know. The metrics are important, no doubt, but cash and status data being accurate, timely, and actionable will enable any financial institution self-service channel to be profitable and, more importantly, be reliable to the customer.
Okay. Good comment. Bob, what's your take on it?
I'll chime in with kind of a corollary to what Ricky was saying. So Ricky kind of talked about other channel alternatives, for example, to accomplish the same task, right? And that does sound entirely complex, but a variation of that just comes down to how problems are communicated to customers, right? So historically, problem resolution wasn't so much about the customer. Well, it was the customer's uptime, right? That was concerned. So problem alerts were to bank personnel, right? Hiding somewhere in a call center, ready to dispatch technicians. But experience across other channels suggests how you communicate problems to consumers in the context of their interaction with that channel is hugely important. So for example, one application I'm very familiar with is, most of us are now, mobile remote deposit capture, right? So as everyone who's tried it knows, it doesn't work flawlessly every time, but how you communicate that to customers is huge. If you simply say, oops, your deposit failed, the unstated thing is, too bad, so sad. Well, that's not very helpful. But if you say, well, gosh, your hand wasn't steady, or you need to put it on a background with sharper contrast, or you need to put it in an area that has more light. That's very helpful, because now the customer can resolve very quickly what was once a problem and walk away satisfied. So in an ATM, for example, let's say the receipt paper's out, right? Well, that doesn't mean the ATM needs to be out of commission, and it doesn't mean a customer may not make a deposit if they're alerted that, well, gosh, maybe they've never signed up for this, but click here and we'll enter your email address, and we can email the receipt to you, or we can just have it go to your internet banking portal, and so that turns a device problem into what might be, depending on the customer, very much a non-event.
Right, right. You know, it's interesting because I was talking to another editor yesterday, and he was saying that he had encountered his first EMV ATM, and it was not a happy experience for him. And he said that it recognized his chip card and asked him whether he wanted to make a debit transaction or a MasterCard transaction, and it was actually a MasterCard chip card. So he was really confused about what he was being told. And I think that just kind of demonstrates, it took him twice in two attempts to actually get cash. And I think that does demonstrate the difficulty in letting customers know what they need to do, because they will follow directions, but they have to know what the directions are, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, Suzanne, just another thought on that,
Sure.
to the point that you just mentioned, really, because that is something definitely we spend a lot of time on, and I think every financial institution has that responsibility to know your customer and understand your customer base and the customers that you serve. While it may be very easy to quickly adapt to the new technology and software that is available, as financial institutions and key responsible stakeholders for delivering the applications and the services to our customers, it is our responsibility to ensure that we deliver that application or that service in a consistent way, that it makes it a seamless transition for our entire customer base and not just maybe what we like to define as the emergence of the customer 3.0, this newer generation that would prefer the mobile phone or online banking versus the in-lobby branch teller. So, and once we deliver and provide that application or that customer engagement source, we have to also make sure we provide the necessary information that would allow for a seamless transaction.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, people feel foolish when they can't get things to work. So I guess it's all about making the customer comfortable and feeling enabled themselves. So on question 4, let's go ahead and move on. How do ATM management solutions need to change to accommodate the self-service experience? And let's start with Scott with this question.
So 10, even 5 years ago, the ATM channel was just singular by itself, all by its lonesome. Some of the FIUs even viewed these as a cost channel to provide a required service, a tick in the box, if you will. Now with self-service being a tangible, real service that could move consumers from one FI to another or even create stickiness depending on their overall experience, this has revolutionized the ATM channel itself and created this omni-channel. More products, more services, which equates to requirement to have an increase in uptime when is the most important, anytime, all the time. The major platforms need more automation to let the operators focus on immediate customer-facing issues. These solutions must have full visibility to everything affected. I mentioned a few of these before, but let me expand a little bit more. FLMs, SLM maintenance, the CIT replenishment schedules and values, asset and inventory, transaction volumes, historical trends, and the overall channel strategy, such as reciprocity management and representational strategy. Again, marrying up the overall strategy with the operational demand is key to all this. So combining these and others should be a single operational view with maximum automation, minimal number of handoffs under one integrated solution.
Okay, so keep it simple, basically.
That's exactly right. Lots of different angles coming in, but have it all funnel into one simple solution so everyone's got one place to go to understand the overall value chain.
Oh, that makes sense. So, Bob, what's your response to this?
Well, like Scott was saying, for most of his life, ATMs were isolated, right? Not only from a channel silo perspective, as were the other channels, but from a placement perspective, right? And so, if an ATM malfunctioned, I don't think consumers, for most of its life, had the expectation they could receive help, right? It was dead, too bad, so sad. In today's environment, though, consumers are increasingly conditioned to have access to near instant help anytime, anywhere, right? On a website or an app, right? Customers expect collect a call or chat availability, or even video is emerging as a viable customer engagement mechanism too, and it's not going to just be on personal teller machines, but across. I think it's happening there first, but we see evidence that banks are thinking about video as more of a omnichannel engagement mechanism. So that said, when problems occur at the ATM as well as in other channels, staff are going to need to be in a position to help them. And so monitoring solutions, therefore, are going to have multiple users in the bank, not just at the help desk, but in the case of personal teller machines, remote tellers, as well as branch staff like we talked earlier.
Right. Yeah, because I think that was a good point about online experience. It seems like any retail website you go to anymore is going to have a chat box in it that you can contact someone immediately if you have a question. So there is that expectation of immediacy. Ricky, what do you have to add here?
Well, I think Scott and Bob both hit on key points there. And taking it from the perspective of the financial institution. The one thing I would say for the financial institution that may not today be set up where a lot of the monitoring is in-house, or a lot of the capabilities to provide that support and maintenance around the ATM is not in-house or outsourced to a third-party vendor, there's going to be a demand for that third-party vendor to also be able to model a service or a maintenance support model that could provide the same solution that both Scott and Bob touched on. So the ability to be able to do the real-time video chat or the real-time video assistance with remote capabilities of maybe troubleshooting or performing some real-time resolution of the failed interaction, not just within the bank but also within the third-party vendor. I think that would also be key, and we would see an increased demand from those third-party vendors.
Okay. All right. Thanks. That kind of wraps up our panel questions and segment, and we'll go to some final thoughts from our panelists. Clark, why don't you start us off? Oops. Let's try Ricky. Ricky, you want to jump in again?
Sure, no problem. I think all in all, everything's stated today here nailed down to a couple of points. Obviously, omnichannel and the way that that particular financial institution takes to approach omnichannel and what it may mean to that financial institution. At the end of the day, we all agree that it has to be a consistent delivery mechanism that would require some leveraging of all available applications to be able to maximize and optimize the customer engagement and the transaction, to be able to provide a 24/7, anytime, anyhow, anywhere engagement with the customer and provide our customers with the ability to perform what we view today as the in-branch transaction outside of the branch and extend really banking outside of your Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, to more of a 7 days a week, 365 a year, 24 hours a day. So how do we get to that? Obviously, it's going to be a challenge as we continue to build out different models and plan and learn from our different rollouts and different strategies. But it's going to be really driven based on customer feedback and as we continue to share with one another best practices as we learn and continue to grow within this omnichannel solution.
Right. That brings up a good point, and that is, this is about the customer experience. So how are you receiving customer feedback or inviting it, and what kind of feedback are you getting?
Well, in today's environment where we are today, we're still very, very early. So the plan would be, obviously, I think Bob mentioned something in regards to video chat. We do have a video solution out on our market, a small subset at the moment, but we're going to be looking at a number of different things from customer feedback. We've already done some customer engagement surveys in regards to in the markets where we have those video solutions. We're going to continue to look at customer engagement surveys to get feedback. Our biggest thing is we want to continue to obviously engage the customer and build out a solution that is going to both meet the demand of the customer and optimize, as well as be able to provide the needs of the unknown customer. So.
Right, exactly. Okay. Scott, do you want to give us your closing thoughts here?
Yes, of course. First off, thanks for everyone's time today. I appreciate you guys, everybody joining. As we talk to more and more FIs, they're increasingly asking about their distribution channels in terms of transaction complexity, alignment, relationship building, and cross-selling. Whether the channel is self-service or a branch or the digital channel, the omnichannel, banks and IADs need to ensure that each channel is delivering to these challenges. One of my expectations is that this trend in the way the consumers are using the bank channels will continue to change, and that the boundaries between these channels will become less formal, and consumers will move between channels with more transaction fluidity, exactly why we're here again today. Now, from something near and dear to my heart, from the management solutions, need to be able to focus on a way in which to leverage that operational data, transactions, cash, status, to target the very best customer experience towards our most critical customer segments. And this is using data analytics to find out when, where, and how they're using the channel. I think Ricky and I have had many conversations, and I think there's actually a question on the panel right now. I'll go ahead and jump ahead to is the failed customer interactions and FCIs, and how we're changing to that, to moving away from availability. Overall availability is just one metric to use. Failed customer interactions and weighing that with overall supply and demand is critical on this. So when you combine all these together, these solutions will need to be able to reduce the silo mentality and the performance information readily accessible to anybody who needs it. This will lead to an exceptional service delivery, greater operational efficiencies, and leverages the IT investments across the multiple channels, services, and operational units.
Okay, great. Bob, let's go to you now.
Certainly. So it's kind of been said before, but maybe it bears restating. Things are changing, and changing at a very uncomfortably fast pace. And you know what? That might not ever go away, and we don't have to like it, but it is part of our reality. And so in that sense, omnichannel is both practical, right? It's here, it's now, it's a moving target, but we need to figure out a way to. But it's also aspirational. We don't know of a single institution that asserts that it's arrived, and even if it did, it probably wouldn't think that way for long, because it would find something else to work on, right? So enjoy, get on the road, enjoy the view, and have fun with it. It's going to be a fun journey for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the point is, I think that you brought up, it has to be practical for the bank as well as the consumer, and we'll get a little more into that in our Q&A, I'm sure. So from here, and I want to thank all of you guys for some really great comments. Really appreciate your input and your insights on this, because it's a complex and sort of confusing thing at times. So we're going to move now to the audience Q&A and go through the questions that our audience has submitted to us. If you still have a question that you have not submitted, you're welcome to do that, and just put that in the chat box at the bottom left hand of your screen, and we will get to that if we can, and if we can't, we'll answer it by email. You'll see that we have the email address on the screen. Stacy Gorkoff will take in all the questions and distribute them to the proper people for answering. So you might want to make a note of her email address right now in case we don't get to your question, or in case you think you might have something later. So let's go ahead and dive into these. I think this first one that I want to ask is something that's I think maybe the biggest stumbling block that I'm aware of, and that is, how do you break down the silos? Ricky, how did you tackle that task?
Well, the one thing I would say, Suzanne, like I said, we're still very early, and really and honestly, it takes a strong structured organization to ensure that everyone can come to the table, and obviously there's going to be some compromises, but we want to make sure that at the end of the day we all see the great benefit. And I think at any financial institution, everyone would be able to sit at the table and understand the importance of being able to provide the consistent customer application and to be able to drive transactions and provide the services that our customers expect. So with that in mind, it's just a matter of working through and understanding the differences within the various channels as they are set up today in the silos, as you mentioned, but also being able to integrate those channels on the back end as well as the front end. Again, it may be defined differently. The look and feel may not be the same, but obviously to be able to merge those channels so that we have a seamless customer transaction process that is going to, at the end of the day, increase the customer's perception and customer satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing you have some others involved at this point who might not have necessarily been part of the discussion before. For instance, I was thinking marketing in order to come up with some of the customer help kind of responses. Have they been involved in this?
They have, and they are a key contributor to ensure that obviously they, from a standpoint of customer engagement, they own a lot of it today, but obviously their feedback and their involvement has been tremendous in our ability to be able to come and move down this path of the omnichannel solution. So that has been very important.
Okay. Scott, I want to get your perspective on this since you've been involved in it for quite some time. What are you seeing in terms of successful silo breakage?
It's getting everybody to the table at the same time and getting all the requirements into one location. This is one of the many successful ones I've had. It has good project managers, partners, and not just suppliers being in the mix. Good partnerships have been the ones that have taken this to the next level and offer for smooth transition. As you know, we're taking ATM software, we're changing that, we're changing the function of the actual hardware themselves, and looking at the help desk and from a video perspective. And last but not least, don't forget about the management solutions to be able to measure the consumer experience. That's vital, all this, to understanding how they're using, how your cardholders are using the channel and be able to take that back. I know a lot of folks that are probably on this call use Net Promoter. Can't give that enough to look at that, analyze those results, and understand what you can take in to improve. So I guess in summary, collaboration with your partners and with the other stakeholders within each one of the financial institutions is key to this, and having it at the very beginning and not later down the road.
Okay, great. I have another question here that I want to get in. We're getting close on time, but Dwayne wants to know, what are some of the main challenges that in your experience you've seen customers have in adopting omnichannel infrastructures? How do you kind of bring the customer successfully into this? And I want to start with Bob on this one.
I haven't thought of it ever in terms of customers adopting omni-channel, infrastructures, but inviting customers to adopt new ways of doing anything is kind of challenging, right? And so it strikes me that the old adage, if you build it, they will come, right? Obviously doesn't work in this case. So I think it does invite it, and for example. Customer adoption of digital, right? They're as marvelous and rapid as digital banking adoption has been. There's still the majority of most banks' retail banking client base are not yet on board. And so, how do you do that? Well, inviting branch staff and training branch staff to reach out and proactively teach and advise and demonstrate and get customers involved that way, right? Try it, you'll like it. We've seen. Earlier on, for example, when deposit automation machines were still relatively new, no small investment for banks and credit unions, right? We saw a number of them promote, for example, at the teller station. If a customer would make a teller line deposit, the teller would hand them a $5 check and say, hey, try this at the machine on the way out, and enjoy the $5 on us. We think you'll love the experience, right? So providing incentives and coaching to assist customers to get over the discomfort of doing something new can play big dividends.
Yeah, I tried something new for $5. Scott, do you have anything that you want to add to this, or?
Bob took the words right out of my mouth on the deposit automation piece. They took, I know several financial institutions hired ambassadors to be able to walk people through that, so that those folks understood how everything works as well. Even from the back office perspective, they don't need to know the intricacies of how the transactions flow and what's doing the authorization or where the management solution's at. But understand the overall customer flow and how they move from one channel to the other is actually key to this, so they can educate the end user or consumer so they can have a rewardable experience on this. So I think Bob is absolutely spot on.
Okay, great. Well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our hour here. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank our presenters for some great information, very helpful. And again, if you have a question, you can always ask it later, or if you submitted your question already, we'll get back to you. So that does it for this conversation, but I hope you'll stay connected to the topic by visiting us at ATM Marketplace. We're going to be doing a lot more on this. Thanks again to our sponsors at iNetco, and to Bob Meara, Ricky Goodwin, and Scott Wilfich. And thanks to all of you for listening in and taking part. Have a great day.